Are you looking for inspiring conversations about faith, film, and life? You're in the right place. Here's the host who knows the right questions to ask, Father Edward Looney.
Hey everybody, it's Father Edward. Grateful you're tuning in for another conversation. Happy President's Day. That is today. And I thought it would be great to have a conversation about presidents, not about their politics or their policies, but a different topic. Now, a lot of you who have been longtime listeners over the 300 episodes and more of the life of this podcast, from How They Love Mary to Hey Everybody, it's Father Edward, you probably know I have a lot of different interests. I like sainthood causes, and I go to the graves of different saints in cemeteries and in the shrines that they are entombed in. And I came across an interview that Kurt Deion, who is our guest today, what he does and what he wrote about in his book, Presidential Grave Hunter. And when I heard this interview that he did, and it was on a podcast that I listened to called Ordinary Extraordinary Cemeteries or something along those lines. And it was a wonderful conversation he had. And as I was listening to it, I couldn't help but keep thinking about myself and how, so often I go to the grave of Venerable Samuel Mazzucchelli or Blessed James Miller or list any number of the Catholic saints or blesseds here in the United States, or when I go to Rome in a few months, that I will encounter in Italy. So I thought that there was a great parallel. He's doing something in a secular way. I'm doing something in a religious way. And I wondered, how does a secular person visit the graves of individuals? So that's what we're going to talk about today as I welcome Kurt Deion, who wrote Presidential Grave Hunter. He is an education specialist and future resident, historic Congressional Cemetery employee, and author of the book Presidential Grave Hunter. He has a website, kurtzhistoric.sites.com, and I'm grateful for his willingness and his acceptance of my invitation. So thanks so much, Kurt, for joining me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Father Edward. Grateful for the opportunity to talk with your viewers and listeners.
Yes. So this book, Presidential Grave Hunter, right here, has a picture of you as a kid, at the grave of Theodore Roosevelt. And this is something that just happened in your youth. And it began from a scholastic book about the presidents. And to be honest, I think that I probably had that book too. I think we're the same age relatively. And, I grew up with scholastic books and whatnot. So I have a great love for presidential history. There's a great book out there. The author's last name is Cohen, I think, but it's called Accidental Presidents. I just listened to another book that he wrote called After Power, just, 7 or 8 presidents after their life of presidency, their contributions and such. Mm-hmm. So presidential history is part of my jam in addition to religion. I love the presidents. So that's why I was drawn to this. But you had a great love for presidents and vice presidents and such from a young age too. So how do you think that came about?
So, as you said, Father, it started in its first little inkling with the book So You Want to Be President by Judith St. George and illustrated by David Small. My mother, Lynn, purchased this book for me using a Scholastic Book Club's order form that I got at my elementary school, Hope Highlands Elementary School at the time in Cranston, Rhode Island, and at first I wanted nothing to do with the book. I had no idea why she wanted to get it for me. I was more concerned, as I write about in the prologue, more concerned about reading comic strips about caped crusaders and lasagna eating felines and playing at recess with my friends at school. But then I picked up the book and I liked the anecdotes that St. George wrote. I loved the funny illustrations that David Small drew, and I was just drawn in by his drawings. And I just couldn't put the book down, and it got to be very worn in its time. So that was my introduction to the presidents themselves, really. Then I went to some presidential related sites, the Adams National Historical Park in Quincy, Massachusetts, the neighboring United First Parish Church, where the two Adams presidents and first ladies are interred. So there are some religious intersections with the presidents as well. Occasionally, they're again interred there in the crypt of that Unitarian church there in Quincy. Then went to John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy's graves at Arlington National Cemetery, and then Mount Vernon, not too far south in Virginia. And I went to these sites. I really enjoyed them. Then my father, a few months later, this would have been in December of 2003, was watching a C-SPAN program that he just stumbled upon, channel surfing. It was a re-airing of a book talk with C-SPAN founder and CEO Brian Lamb talking with his friend and presidential historian Richard Norton Smith about their collaborations on a book, Who's Buried in Grant's Tomb,
Hmm.
that detailed the deaths of the United States presidents, their funerals, and then their burial sites, also how you would access these burial sites. Brian Lamb separately had also gone to the graves of all of the vice presidents, with the exceptions of he still had to get Hubert Humphrey. And was going to visit him, but then also Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, who was on private property. So with those exceptions, he had also gone to the graves of the vice presidents. And then my father relayed the details of this program to me. And then by this point, I was 9 years old, and I looked up at him and I said, "Can we do that?" And he said, "Do what?" And I said, "Go to every presidential burial site." And that's how that quest fully got started. So it's a bit of a prologue there that came in different steps.
For sure. So 9 years old and now to present day. So this has been the trajectory of your life. It's been mapped out over all of, a decade or two, and it's something you're stuck with. Sometimes you have a childhood ambition and it just kind of fizzles out, but you stayed the course.
Yes, absolutely. It's been now since my mother bought me that book. It'd be coming up on, hard to believe, 23 years next, this month actually. So.
Wow, that's incredible to think about. So, this book, Presidential Grave Hunter, it's kind of part memoirish. It's your recounting of these events, and just as you described, some of these took place in childhood. You're kind of revisiting those childhood memories then. So, how were you able to recall some of those things, and maybe the what you thought as you were walking through John Adams and some of the halls or something like that?
Well, it was a mixture of a few different sources. So one was some of these were my most indelible memories that really stuck with me as far as my feelings and whatnot. I also had, thanks to my father with the family camcorder, I had a lot of the actual dialogue that I could put in there to help bring these moments to life, as it were, on the page. And I could also read my sister's expression, my facial expression, and then I had some earlier, more rudimentary writings that also had some thoughts that I had at the time and that were not captured on video that I had written when I first came out with my website, kurtzhistoricsites.com. As you mentioned, Kurt's Historic Sites has been up since I was 14 years old, and now I'm 30. So it had a few different iterations along the way, and so that helped create this collage of different thoughts that I could put into the narrative to paint a cohesive picture, as it were, of what was going through my mind at the time, as well as then my reflections as an adult.
Yeah, when I was a kid, the first website like you would try to create, if that was something you were interested in, was like a geo website, and then you would, evolve from there, with
Mhm.
Blogger or WordPress or whatever. So a lot of iterations, I'm sure. So you mentioned your mom and your dad, so they've been supportive of this your whole life then.
Oh yes, my parents have been very supportive of myself and my sister. I had a more easy path in finding what I was interested in, I'd say, than my sister. So it was easier for them to just immediately go, "Oh, okay, we will help you get to all these presidential sites that you want to visit," which included the homes and libraries as well when they were tied into the grave sites. But the grave sites were my number one priority because that's where, in my view, at least in the physical corporeal sense, that's where the president ended up. Right, I couldn't meet Abraham Lincoln in person. I was born in 1994. He died in 1865, but I could go to the only home that he and Mary
Mm.
ever owned in Springfield, Illinois, and I was allowed to put my hand on the railing as I went up in their house, or I could go to the Union Oyster House in Boston, where John F. Kennedy liked to have clam chowder, and I could eat there. But then I could go to the grave sites as well, where their funerals brought them, and it really put into perspective maybe what they wanted for themselves, where they wanted to end up, or in other cases, like I was just talking about two assassinated presidents, the decisions that their spouses and other close ones made for them, how they wanted them to be remembered by generations following, and a reminder that again they were real people that existed, and I'm sure you feel that same way when you go to the final resting places or sites of relics of different saints or
Yeah.
whatnot, that these are not just figures that we read about in documents and or the Bible, that they were indeed real people with visitable sites who walked the same earth that we did, kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of, I was thinking about that as you were sharing about going to that restaurant. In the book, you even mentioned walking the same route that Truman walked, on his daily walks or that hand
Mhm.
railing, right? So, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, there is a bishop named Bishop Frederick Baraga. He is buried in the Cathedral Church in Marquette, Michigan. And right down the road from the cathedral is the bishop's residence where he lived in the 1700s or 1800s, whenever he lived. So, and as they were doing some renovations and whatnot, they believed they found some things that maybe under the floorboards, that maybe it was a drop of blood or candle wax or something from his seal or something, but they could date that back to the time of Bishop Baraga. Or I know too, like when I was in Birmingham just recently, I visited the grave of a murdered priest. His name was Father James Coyle, and he was a part of the civil rights movement, or no, not part of the civil rights movement. Rather, he witnessed the marriage between a Protestant minister's daughter and an interrace person, and so this Protestant minister murders him as
Wow.
he's sitting out on the porch of the rectory. But buried in the cemetery, and I've read his story through a historical biography, and I just thought, well, I'll go, I'll visit, I prayed my prayers at the grave, some prayers there, and just there's something about being connected, I think, to these individuals through our visits. So, uh,
Mhm.
yeah, as we think about these visits and everything like that, I guess what's the process of a visit for you? So, one of the things you recommend, and this is something I've often recommended, like if you're going to go visit Samuel Mazzucchelli, well, there's a great new 20-minute documentary short that you could watch, or you should read something they wrote, so you can dive into their story a little bit, so you can better appreciate it. So it's kind of like learning this history. That's one of the things you drew out as an example, like visiting these graves adds to the historical learning that you can do. So, what's your process then as you go about your visit?
Well, I wouldn't say that over the course of my now, let's see, almost 22 years of visiting grave sites in this manner that I've had one process. Sometimes it's a case by case basis. Sometimes, especially with the presidents, I went in with a pre-existing knowledge that I had learned from reading books or watching some documentaries. Sometimes, of course, I would learn things along the way. There'd be, I was at the site and there would be interpretive signage, or they would be buried at their home or presidential library. There would be a National Park Service ranger to give tours of the home, and then we would go to the grave site. Sometimes, as I've expanded my search way beyond the presidents, vice presidents, and first ladies to other individuals. Sometimes I don't have as much time to do research beforehand. Sometimes I will be at a cemetery. There's somebody that I've already been interested in that I know about. I visit their final resting place, and then I look at the Find a Grave website, a great database, findagrave.com, very resourceful. And I'll just look who else is here that was maybe not on my radar that somehow slipped by me, and I see, oh, that name sounds slightly familiar, and I know that's the popular historical or pop culture figure, but I don't know as much about them right now. But still, I'm here. When am I ever going to get back to this state 1,000 miles away from my home, visit the site now, do the research later. So,
Sure.
so it really depends on the circumstances. So it could be one of three or four different ways, but usually know a bit about the person before I go, but not in every instance. As a friend said to me about 10 years ago, I know a little about a lot of things too. So there's some things I know a lot about, and then there's big plethora of other things that I know at least a tiny bit about to get me through.
So you visit the grave and you're like, what do? You take a picture? How long do you stay at the grave itself in the cemetery? What are some of those practical things?
So that also can be a case by case basis. So some of the graves I've been to, especially say a presidential grave site, they tend to be a bit more elaborate. Not in every case, but a lot of they have a lot more details to soak in, or the scenery strikes me as really beautiful. We're not really time crunched, my father and I, or whoever I'm traveling with now. That could be something that I really just soak in for a good long while. Then usually almost always, well, I can't think of a situation I wouldn't, but take photographs so of the what I would say is an establishment shot. So because I share these on my website and along with the GPS coordinates in case
Mm.
people want to do find and visit these graves themselves. So I try to show the surrounding area for some landmarks that people can find the gravesite. I also take photographs of the different details closer in of the grave itself, the entire monument. Close-up details that I want to draw attention to, and then also almost always take my picture with the gravesite as well, because my father really drove home to me the documentation aspect of it. Of course, this was before AI could just say, "Oh, put in Kurt there," and somebody could fake it these days.
Yeah.
I suppose a more easy than having to do the Photoshop work. But I always have my photo there, and it's also documentation of my life in a way. You can see again me at 8 years old at George and Martha Washington's tomb at Mount Vernon, and now going to graves, and I'm 30. So the progression along the way. Sometimes a grave. We might be in more of a rush though, and there's not as many details. It's just a simple flat marker that just has the person's name and their years, and the cemetery closes in half an hour, and I still have three more graves I have to get to. That might be a little bit more of a rush situation, but generally, at least, always try to use the GPS coordinates, make sure I'm keeping track of those, get the photographs, and at least reflect a moment or so about what this person did and how they impacted the lives of others and what they're noted for.
Yeah, I know sometimes it's difficult to find a grave. Like that Father Coyle that I mentioned from Alabama. Like I knew he was in this cemetery. Find a grave told me it was like, block A24 or something like that. And like, okay, well, I'll just drive around. And, it's like, I don't know if I should go left or if I should go right. I don't know how exactly I'm going to find it. I knew it was a Celtic cross. So I'm like, okay, I'll just keep looking for this Celtic cross. It was a larger grave. So eventually, though, I did find it, surprisingly. And I was grateful for that. But yeah, it's helpful to be able to find a grave with someone else's help. And, sometimes even I'll like record a little video of like, here's me going to the grave of this person that it might be difficult for you to find. And so this is how you can find it. And yeah, I think that's a great resource, for me, when I visit, so there was this famous archbishop named Archbishop Fulton Sheen. He had a television show. He had won an Emmy and so forth. And he's buried now in Peoria. They transferred his body from New York to Peoria. He's buried again in the cathedral church. And he was a prolific writer, wrote volumes after volumes of books. And so I had maybe 6 books. So when I went to pray at the grave or the tomb of Fulton Sheen, I brought my books with me and I placed them on his grave or his tombstone, his sarcophagus. And, that was just one of those little things that I did. And, kind of what you mentioned too, like if you're going to go to the grave of Edgar Allan Poe, you're probably going to bring an Edgar Allan Poe book and you're going to read your favorite passage or your most favorite or just one of his writings, just to appreciate him. So I think that's what you brought out there, just like having a few moments to appreciate who this person was and the contributions that they made.
Hmm. Exactly. And also, as far as finding a grave, I think an anecdote that you will appreciate, I believe it was back in 2019, I was in the Philadelphia area. I think it was West Conshohocken. I was looking for the grave of a Pro Football Hall of Fame inductee, Emlyn Tennell. And I was with a family friend, Lou Pagano, and I could not find him for the life of me for about 45 minutes, and Lou was looking around too, and he had just a flat marker. We were trying to use a photograph of trees and whatnot, and Lou was quite a religious person, so after about 45 minutes, he said that he was going to submit a prayer to Saint Anthony
Of
and
course.
see if he could find this lost grave for us. And I tell you, within 20 seconds, I found Emlyn Tennell's gravesite. So
That's
that
great.
that might have been some divine intervention there. But
Now, what do your friends, so let's say you go out on a Saturday night to the pub with some of your friends and they know what you do. What do they think of it? What's their impression of you hunting down graves and kind of this obsession with cemeteries or the dead or whatever? What do they think about that?
well, I would say that it took me a while to find my people. When I was growing up, I was certainly not. I was not necessarily the most popular person in school over this hobby or passion of mine. But then as I got to be an adult, it got easier for me to find people that had similar interests. I got to meet some more history-related people. Of course, now I work at a historic congressional cemetery, so I'm definitely in a realm where people understand my passion for visiting grave sites, and also even other people. I think that when I went to school with them, maybe didn't think much of it. Now think, well, hey, you knew what you wanted to do since you were a little kid, and that's pretty cool. And it's sometimes also good for, again, just learning about people and events and movements and whatnot that those people were tied to. Sometimes it's really good for pub trivia as well.
Okay.
That helps.
So just maybe a few quicker questions. Out of the graves, so of course you're documenting presidential graves here, also vice presidential graves. Uh, who's a grave that you wanted to visit the most?
Well, of course, and that changes as I visit
Sure.
certain graves, but Abraham Lincoln's was a very big deal for me. I visited what first visited when I was 9 years old, and that was just really momentous to have in my at that point 2.5 years of learning about President Lincoln, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're going from 7 to 9, that's a lot. um, Learning about him and then seeing his immense tomb in Springfield, Illinois, also visiting his home there, and again, walking the streets that he walked, putting hand on the railing in the home. That was just really impactful, and his gravesite is so tall and elaborate. Again, it's more of how we as a country wanted to remember Lincoln than how he
Mm.
personally requested to be remembered at a gravesite or anything. But it was just really incredible to go walk in there and see his final resting place in this immense tomb. Another one that was big on my list that I didn't think I was going to get to that's detailed in the book is Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, because that was on private family property in Sleepy Hollow, New York, and that was a very rare grave for people to get to. More recent than the book, a grave that I didn't think I was going to be able to get to, but then I did manage was actor Humphrey Bogart in
Mhm.
a locked area of Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, and I got to him. Now I would say the white whale, as it were, would be Charles Carroll of Carrollton, the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence and the last surviving one. And he is actually entombed in a private family chapel on private family property in Ellicott City, Maryland, and that family guards their privacy quite strictly. So that's a very rare one to get to. So that one I believe will be the hardest of all, but hopefully they will at some point open their arms and hearts to people to at least pay their respects to this founding father. But
Yeah, I would think, if I was them, like one day a year, maybe on his birthday or his death day or the weekend closest to it, like you would open up your estate property, be like, anybody that wishes to come can come on this one day a year. And then, but who knows if they would ever do that. But that would be if I was in their shoes, what I think would be a good thing. So of the presidential or the vice presidential graves, I know you detailed the one that was really hard to find. St. Anthony might have helped you find it, but was there a vice president or a presidential grave that was difficult to find? I'm assuming that most of them are pretty prominent and there's signs and all that, but were there any that were hidden in a sense?
the presidents are pretty much all straightforward. It's just a matter of getting there during the appropriate hours. Some are seasonal too. The James Garfield tomb, you can go up to, but can't get in the winter months. Same with the Church of the Presidents, the United First Parish Church where the Adams are interred, as I mentioned, in Quincy. Massachusetts. The visitor program there is open usually from mid-April to mid-November. So, other than church services and their Unitarian church programs, they're not really open in the colder weather. So there's that. No difficulty really finding them though, at least from my experience.
Okay.
The vice presidents, some of them might be a little more uh, difficult here and there. Some are in cemeteries that you have to get maybe more deep into some of those winding roads. There's also a vice president in Natick, Massachusetts, Henry Wilson. There's a few cemeteries on that stretch. One is like the old Dell Park Cemetery. One's the new Dell Park Cemetery. You just have to make sure you're going to the right one. And then his is a very small grave marker, but
Hmm.
definitely none of them were really among the most difficult grave sites that I've had to find over the years, I'd say.
So each of these gravestones is going to be very different from one to the other. Some are going to be big monuments, others are going to be small little tributes. Whatever the family, whatever the country decided to do for that person, I suppose. But is there one that's the most unique, I guess, that you've discovered?
Well, one that really stood out to me was President and Mrs. Garfield's grave site in Cleveland, Ohio, that I just mentioned. It's 180 feet tall. It's replete with gargoyles and
Hmm.
a statue of President Garfield in Italian marble. It has mosaics, has different decks, levels. Then you go into the crypt in the basement, and President and Mrs. Garfield, they are not in sarcophagi or in a wall vault or anything. Their caskets are laid out on biers or tables. So just seeing still the flag draped casket there of the president and of the first lady next to him is a really interesting visual there. I'll throw in also to have a, and he was a preacher president, and I'll throw in to tie in with another religious theme, an interesting one my father and I went to. That's an example of did not know anything about this person before we visited the gravesite. Last year, we went on a very ambitious trip, and that brought us in part to the Lake Erie region of New York, and we were in, I believe it was Lackawanna, to visit the grave of a baseball Hall of Fame inductee. And then as we're driving through town, we see all these signs like home of Father Baker, Nelson Baker,
Oh yeah.
had
Uh,
we had no prior knowledge of him whatsoever. That we see that he was formerly buried in this cemetery, but then he got moved to the
Our
basilica
Lady of
next door.
Victories. Yeah.
Right. So then
Okay.
we went and we said, well, this town is so passionate about Father Baker. We were then able to read some signs, do a little bit of quick Wikipedia research, and see how big of a deal he was leading up to and in the Great Depression, and said, oh, well, we should go. And then we go into the basilica and all the grand monuments and there and everything. And there were, people that were in there actively to worship. And then we found Father Baker's sarcophagus and had to wait a little bit timing wise because there was somebody who was paying their respects, praying, sitting at Father Baker's sarcophagus and didn't want to. Interrupt his, religious experience there and everything. So that was a very ornate one. Too, of course, the Garfield was as much as just to the Garfields versus Father Baker's part of this more overall, basilica
Hmm.
there. But those are some ones that really stood out to me.
Are there some of these presidential graves that you would revisit in your lifetime, do you think?
Oh, I've revisited many of these graves. I most recently was back at George Washington's a few weeks ago because I was there to attend an event with held by Dr. Lindsay Travinsky, who's great director, the executive director of the Presidential Library there, and then they had the inaugural coat that George Washington wore when he was sworn in as the first president in 1789. So, of course, while I was there, I revisited the Washington tomb. I've been to of course, I interned for a bit at the Church of the Presidents where the Adamses are interred. So it was actually my job to like turn on the lights and open up the church for visitors. So I visited them 3 days a week back in the summer of 2019. So I've revisited most of the presidential grave sites at this point. There's some that are so far away from where I am on the East Coast that I haven't revisited yet, like uh, Reagan and Nixon are in California. I've not revisited the two in Texas, LBJ and George H.W. Bush yet, but I've revisited most of the grave sites at this point and hope to many times over my remaining years.
I think sometimes maybe we hype a grave or a person up in our mind, like our expectation of our experience to come as we visit that place. So, was there one that maybe you were just disappointed with or was just underwhelming for you?
Well, as far as the presidents are, if you just go on the nature of the office, you would think that, oh, everybody's going to have a grand gravesite. But sometimes they're just like Martin Van Buren, the eighth
Mm.
president, who's just in this sleepy little historically Dutch village, Kinderhook, New York. And if there weren't a sign there and you didn't have prior knowledge, you would have no idea that a United States president was buried in this little graveyard with an obelisk that you can't even really read the inscription on
Hmm.
anymore. So they've had to subsequently add signage that says this is what the grave says. So presidentially, I would say Martin Van Buren is an example of although I think it fits Martin Van Buren, but if you're trying to compare it to the office of the presidency, it would be kind of a letdown. I would say as far as other individuals again, so this would be post book details. But when I went to visit a lot of the grave sites of celebrities in the Hollywood, California area, a lot of them just have flat markers flush with the ground that are just very simple. And sometimes we think, oh, they're these really glamorous individuals, or at least that's how their public perception was played up to be, and they were in the. This is a three-time Oscar winner, Walter Brennan, and then he has a flat marker with, just his and his wife's name on it, and they actually have a couple religious symbols, but it's very. You walk around and there's nothing. There's no neon
Hmm.
sign that says, Clark Gable and Carol Lombard are here,
Hmm.
or Walter Brennan's here, or anything. So,
So I live in the state of Wisconsin. I'm assuming Lincoln might be the closest to me in Springfield. That would be about an 8 hour drive, I would think. But would there be any other presidential or vice presidential grave close to me in Wisconsin?
yes, so a closer vice president than Lincoln as president would be Vice President Charles Dawes is in Chicago. So I
Okay.
think that might be a bit closer to you.
And then you had one in Minnesota too, the vice president.
Yes, Hubert Humphreys at
Oh yeah.
Lakewood Cemetery, and reportedly at some point, Vice President Walter Mondale, who's now been deceased for almost 4 years, still he was cremated. Supposedly, his ashes are going to be interred at that same cemetery. That's according to a Minneapolis Star-Tribune article from reporter Jennifer Brooks, where she talked with the Mondale's surviving family at one point. But and that article was in 2022, but to this point, to my knowledge, it still has not happened. So one, maybe someday, two, but that seems to be very much in limbo. But there's, of course, other historical figures in Wisconsin. I've been to Wisconsin only once, but I managed to see Saturday Night Live actor Chris Farley's in
Yeah.
Madison. Also, in Wisconsin, I visited Robert La Follette, the longtime senator
Oh,
who ran for president as a progressive, and also Les Paul has a very interesting grave there. The guitar, I don't, what would I exactly say? Tweaker, innovator, musician.
mm.
He has a very interesting grave there.
Ah.
So those are the three Wisconsin graves I've been to. But
Yeah, there's an economic philosopher who's pretty famous. His name's Thorsten Veblen, I think. He's buried in southern Wisconsin. But also, too, in Plainfield, Wisconsin, there is a serial killer, Ed Gein, who is
mm,
buried there. And they actually had to remove the gravestone because people would just deface it and everything like that. So,
mm,
not that I would encourage going to the grave of a serial killer or anything like that, but it's just one of those interesting things. And I mentioned earlier the name Blessed James Miller. He was a religious brother, served in Guatemala, was murdered in Guatemala, but he's buried in his family plot in a little village from where I live, just an hour down the road. So a lot of times I'll be passing by that cemetery to go southwest. So I will. Southwestern Wisconsin. So I will just stop there and visit
mm,
it every time because I'm like I feel like I should, you know. So
mm,
I do, but those are just a few other ones that not presidential, but come to mind for my sake here in
mm.
Wisconsin. Now, I was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I gave a talk at a conference, and I just remember walking in the downtown area, and there was signage for something about a president. It wasn't for a grave, was it? Or is there a president buried in Lancaster, Pennsylvania?
Yes, there is. So, President James Buchanan, the 15th
Okay.
president, so the one before Abraham Lincoln, he is from there. He has a home, Wheatland, that you can tour and visit there. There's also some other sites downtown, like there's a statue of him. There is a grave of a young woman who at one point he was reportedly engaged, Anne Coleman, and then there is his gravesite at I believe it's Woodward Hill Cemetery in Lancaster there. So the 15th president, and he's actually buried right by the first speaker of the House of Representatives, Frederick Muhlenberg. I believe I'm pronouncing that last name correctly.
Okay.
Might be Mullen.
Um, yeah, actually, I just pulled out my phone and I thought maybe I took a picture of a street sign and I typed in Lancaster, but um, yeah, not showing anything. So I guess I did not take. It's just a mental memory picture in my head. So, well, that's
Well,
good to
maybe
know. If
they'll
I,
invite you back, Father. And you can
yeah,
go.
I hope so. I don't think that conference is held there anymore, but maybe one day I'll get there. So. Now, obviously, you're doing something unique, and yeah, I think sometimes you see different influencers on the internet. Like, again, being here in Wisconsin, some influencers are like, I want to go to every Quick Trip gas station or every Culver's restaurant or whatever. And so they document it, they do that. So, obviously, visiting the graves of presidents, vice presidents, that's kind of a and maybe you haven't reached influencer status. Maybe you have, I don't know. But I'm sure as other people pick up your book, Presidential Grave Hunter, maybe other people feel inspired to do this. So have you talked with people that said, you inspired me to go visit the graves of presidents now?
Oh, absolutely. And there's actually a few weeks ago, there was a woman that I met who visited where I work now, Historic Congressional Cemetery, and she showed me her copy of my book. Her name is Darlene, and it was dog-eared pages, all her handwritten notes in there and everything. And it was really, it was really touching to see somebody who said that she reads my book or references it every day, she said. So that meant a lot. And there's definitely people that have been interested in it. And again, that means a lot because I was inspired by these other people in these books, and
Mm.
now that there's somebody who would, use my book so much, or like the anecdotes in there, or the actual historical information that I also mingle in there with the memoir parts. So that definitely means a lot. I wouldn't say I'm an influencer, but I did have one video I had on Instagram did really go viral recently, which was the um, gravesite of an actor from The Sopranos, Tony Sirico, and
Oh,
that all of a sudden really blew up for some reason. So,
yeah.
so that one video aside, I would not say I'm an influencer, no,
Those
but I
things
do
are
try to
so.
spread the knowledge.
Oh yeah, that's great. Those things are so odd. Like, there are some things that I put out there that I'm like, this is going to be super popular. It's going to get thousands of views, and it gets 500. And then there are other things that I'm like, this is so stupid, but I'm going to put it out there, and that's the thing that gets 195,000 impressions or something like that.
Exactly.
So there's no rhyme or reason. So the things that, and I've realized too on the podcast, is like things that are important or significant to me might not be as interesting to my listeners, but I think sometimes they put up with me. So, but like there are things that, yeah, like I'm a lover of film, and so
Hmm.
sometimes those episodes don't go as well as, or, don't get as much listens as others. So people, I guess I just take people aren't interested in the same things as me sometimes. But when it comes to yeah, people visiting the graves of presidents, who's somebody else that's done something similar, but maybe not for presidents or vice presidents? Like, is there someone out there that you know of that has done? I don't know, like anything come to mind, I guess. Like I'm thinking football coaches or, anything along those lines, I guess. Is there anybody out there similar to you?
Oh, definitely. And the thing about social media, and some of its positives is that it has brought me together with some people who we have somewhat similar interests. And like I have a friend, TJ, who influenced me. At first, I was visiting only the some of the most famous baseball Hall of Famers like Satchel Paige or Mickey Mantle, but then he was visiting all of them, so I was just like, oh, I should visit every single baseball Hall of Famer. There's actually a person who has written a book about visiting the grave sites of baseball Hall of Famers. His name is Ralph Carhart, and he wrote a book called The Hall Ball, where he and his wife found a waterlogged baseball in a creek in Cooperstown, New York, and they decided, what if we took this discarded object from the location of the Baseball Hall of Fame, and what if we brought it to each gravesite of every, deceased Hall member, and also got a photo of every living Baseball Hall of Fame member holding it. So that was a unique spin, and so his book is The Hall Ball. There's somebody else that I learned about that he's trying to visit every single baseball player ever's grave or something. Also somebody who I'm acquainted with and who actually used to intern at Historic Congressional Cemetery, albeit before I worked there. There's a Rosie Grant is somebody who over the last few years has gotten a lot of attention on social media and has been interviewed on different like local news programs for visiting the grave sites of people, everyday people who have chosen for their epitaphs to have recipes. And what she does is she
Oh,
goes around, and so she'll research the obviously look up, see what the recipe is. She will make the food
oh,
using
wow.
that recipe, and then she will bring it to the grave site. And then in a few instances, I believe she's been able to connect with the surviving family members of those individuals and maybe get more of that deceased person's background. Why did they choose a recipe? Why this recipe? Are there any details in the recipe that couldn't be fit into the stone that would be helpful in making the food, stuff like that. So I know somebody who he also visits all sorts of grave sites, but he's particularly interested in Medal of Honor recipients. So
Okay.
there's visiting grave sites too, just beyond that interest of seeking out a particular theme. I think visiting cemeteries is a very wide-ranging big tent hobby where you could go be interested in just the architectural reasons. You could be, some people might say they're a little more, into the macabre or spookiness or something, or somebody again like ourselves might be interested in a particular theme of people. And I think there's or some people go to clean headstones, and
Yeah.
I think that it's a very big tent hobby. There's not just one reason that somebody visits a cemetery.
Yeah, I love visiting cemeteries, even if it's not for religious purposes of, visiting a tomb of someone. It's been meaningful to me, like people that maybe I met on social media, never met in real life, but like I felt a connection. Like maybe had message back and forth. Like there was a priest down in St. Augustine, Florida, and I vacation in St. Augustine once a year. And so I said we should get, lunch sometime when I'm down there. And he passed away before I was able to get there. So I went to his grave just as a way to like honor him and pay him respects or whatever. But I like too, just walking around a cemetery, looking at the interesting things people do put on their graves, the different
Mhm.
sayings or some of the designs. One of the things in the Catholic Church that during the first 8 days of November, it's highly encouraged to visit cemeteries and to pray for the dead, and you can gain an indulgence and all this stuff. So I highly promote it because A, I'm interested in cemeteries, but B, I think it's a great thing to do just to walk around and see the people that are buried there. And I did a TikTok about like what I do when I go to my hometown cemetery. So my mom is buried there, my grandma's buried there, but like I'll go to the grave of this person that was influential in my childhood. This person was my first grade teacher. This person took me on a trip. I also visit the graves of four priests in my hometown cemetery, and I
Mhm.
never knew them. Some of them died back in the late 1800s or early 1900s. I don't know. I don't know them, but as a priest, I feel connected to them. So I visit and
Mhm.
pray at their graves. So yeah, I have like a little routine as I and usually I'll walk and I'll pray the rosary as I walk the cemetery. So like I'm getting steps in, I'm praying, and I'm taking in the graves, and it's just something that I do. So yeah, I love visiting cemeteries, and I think the next presidential grave you're obviously going to have to visit is Jimmy Carter. So do you have plans already to go visit his grave?
Uh, Only in the absolute most tentative sense of I have a few friends that are interested in going together at some point. So we say, okay, when the time comes, we will work out a plan to go. But that's the only sense in which I currently have plans because the gravesite is currently not open to the public. They're
Mm.
still getting it ready. The most recent president to die before President Carter was George H.W. Bush, and he had a set little cemetery location at his presidential library where they were able to open it up within days. But the Carter situation is much different. This was a Secret Service controlled area where it
Mm.
was still the President Carter's home, where he lived, and it's turning over to the National Park Service. So there's a lot more complicated details with that has prevented the Carter gravesite from opening up as immediately as, say, George H.W. Bush's did. So, when the time comes, I will be there and I will return to Plains. One of my readers, it tends to be one of their favorite chapters of my book is actually when I went down with my father to Plains back in June 2013 to meet President and Mrs. Rosalind Carter. And President Carter taught a Sunday school class
Oh,
there at
yes.
Maranatha Baptist church, and so I did get to already take in Plains a bit there, and it'll definitely be different going now that he's no longer there. Mrs. Carter, Rosalind is deceased as well, but so I'm glad they've already taken that in. But yeah, so I know the layout of Plains a bit, but the circumstances of his burial don't currently allow visitors. So we'll see when that happens.
I see.
I've seen a report that the grave sites might be open as soon as the summer, or there would be an announcement rather, at least this
Mm,
summer. But the home, the Carters are buried in their front yard of their home in Plains. That it might take a few years for the home to open up as the museum as intended. We'll see.
I see. I know we've gone a long time, longer than I normally go. That just shows how interested I am in our conversation today. I know we talked before. I'm like, I think this is going to be my favorite episode, one of my favorite episodes. I've been looking forward to this conversation, so I think this is evidence of that. So maybe just one last thing that came to mind, like sometimes when you visit a grave, um, maybe someone leaves a penny or they'll bring something or whatever. So, like, I guess I was just wondering if, in your experience, you've ever seen like a unique thing that people bring to somebody's grave. Like, there is this a priest that's buried out in Massachusetts. Maybe venerable or servant of God, Patrick Peyton. He was a Holy Cross father, buried in the cemetery where the priests are, and people will bring a rosary and place it on his grave because he was known as the rosary priest. He encouraged people to pray the rosary. So they come and they bring a rosary. So I guess wondering if you've seen something like that.
Oh, I've seen all manners some people call them grave goods. What people leave there. I've seen all manners of things. Of course, flowers, alcohol bottles. I have gone to the graves of some criminals, like Clyde Barrow. Bonnie and Clyde has had some shell casings there. I've seen one that really sticks out to me, I would say. And this was just visiting, actually, my great grandparents at St. Anne's Cemetery in Cranston, Rhode Island. Went to go visit, and this was soon after the Boston Red Sox won the World Series after their 86-year Curse of the Bambino, and we were just going around, and nearby graves had um, wrapped in protective plastic was newspapers saying that the Red Sox had won the World Series, and they were
Hmm.
tied around the graves of their relatives who were Red Sox fans but never lived the 86 years to see the victory over the Cardinals there. So that's something that sticks out to me. And my father, we had our camera with us, and my father took a photo or two, so I can still see, Johnny Damon on the newspaper there. So that's something that really sticks out to me.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I've written a travel memoir myself called Places of Grace and different churches and shrines, but I have a section on graves that I visit and just give a little reflection on. So, one of the things, so I guess suffice to say, I think some people look to me for recommendations for religious travel. And so I always tell them, look for the shrine, look for, holy places, whatever. Find a holy site on your vacation. Like if you go to Orlando, there's the Basilica of Our Lady, Queen of the Universe. And it's a magnificent church, and they offer a lot. They have confessions every day and lots of things. So like if someone was going to Orlando, I always recommend going there and making a spiritual point during their trip. But I think now I'd probably add to the list, like, look up area cemeteries and see if someone famous is buried there. So that's one of my takeaways today, I think. So I've been speaking with Kurt Deion, who is the author of Presidential Grave Hunter, One Kid's Quest to Visit the Tombs of Every President and Vice President. It's available on Amazon. And where else could people find you online?
Well, and they could purchase it at my website too. So you can also not just kurtzhistoric.sites.com, but to get specifically to the book page where there's a book trailer, like a movie trailer, but for the book, is presidentialgravehunter.com. I am on Instagram at KD Grave Hunter, and I am on YouTube, Kurt Deion, and those links are all on my website as well. Again, kurtzhistoric.sites.com, SITES, or presidentialgravehunter.com.
Okay. Well, I do not yet follow you on YouTube or Instagram, so I'll have to go over, subscribe, and like right after this interview. So, well, thanks so much, Kurt, for your willingness to do this. This has been a highlight for me and a conversation I thoroughly enjoyed, and I'll look forward to continuing. I've read a good portion of your book, but we'll keep reading because this is a book like that one person. I just really treasure it. I think it's a great read and just something I'm very interested in. So thanks so much for writing it. And maybe lastly, do you have any other books in the works that you're thinking of?
I do. I have a few ideas. One I have started, but it'll take me a few years to definitely a few years to do because I still have a number of graves to go and be Supreme Court justice related. I have the title, I have the introduction done and part of the first chapter, but I still have about 25, 30 grave sites to go. I've visited only 75 Supreme Court justice graves so far. So,
Okay. Well, good luck with that. Well, thanks so
thank
much,
you.
Kurt. And everybody go over, buy his book here on President's Day, and also give him a follow. Thanks so much for your time today.
Well, thank you for having me, Father Edward.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. And don't forget to stay up to date with what Father Edward is doing by following him on Facebook, X, or Instagram at the handle @FREdwardLooney. Thanks for listening, and please join Father Edward again next time for another inspiring conversation.